Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of the P2P Soap Box. I'm your host and P2P BFF, Marcie Maxwell. If you've been in the world of peer-to-peer events for a while, you probably remember the days of working a different walk in a different city every weekend and managing programs with hundreds of events. Back then, adding new markets felt like the fastest path to grow. But over the years, we've seen that pendulum swing. Many programs have scaled back, either as a strategic shift to focus on quality over quantity, or simply due to limited resources. So what happens when it's time to grow again? How do you evaluate which markets are the right fit? And what does it really take to launch successfully in a new community? Adding a new market is so much more than putting a pin on the map. It requires significant lead time, strong local relationships, experienced mentorship and thoughtful oversight, and the right boots on the ground team, staff, and volunteers. Today, I'm joined by someone who knows this process inside and out. Cliff Whitlock is the National Director of Ride to Defeat ALS and Team Challenge ALS at the ALS Association. The ALS Association is the world's leading ALS organization, powered by people living with ALS, their loved ones, caregivers, advocates, and a dedicated staff team, all serving one mission: to make ALS livable and cure it. In his role, Cliff has been leading the charge to grow the Ride to Defeat ALS series. In our conversation, he shares how his team evaluates potential new markets, what it takes to get a ride off the ground, and how they train and support staff along the way. We'll also dig into the importance of volunteer leadership, strategies for building credibility in new communities, and key lessons learned from first-year challenges. So let's dive in. Here's my conversation with Cliff Whitlock of the ALS Association. Cliff, welcome to the P2P Soap Box. I'm so happy to have you.
Happy to be here, Marcie. Thanks for having me.
I know I shared a little bit about who you are, but tell us from your perspective. Tell us a little bit about your personal journey, your professional journey that led you to your role at the ALS Association.
Sure. Well, nearly 16 years ago, almost exactly, I was convinced to ride from San Francisco to Los Angeles on a 7-day ride with AIDS Life Cycle. And little did I know that I'd be signing up for a career in peer-to-peer fundraising. I was hooked. It's definitely one of the best, most inspiring fundraising charity rides, I would say, in the country, especially multi-day. And ever since, I was looking for something in that world. I was a community organizer for a couple of years and then found an opportunity with a company called Op3, who managed a bunch of different charity events like Avon Walk for Breast Cancer, Bike MS. I was hired to help with just doing recruitment with the Best Buddies Challenge. From there, went to Avon Walk for Breast Cancer, did production for Bike MS, attended a number of other events like Be the Match and overnight walks. And then was brought on as the director for the Napa Valley Ride to Defeat ALS with the ALS Association 9 years ago. And from that success, was able to launch new rides, 5Ks and hikes and marathon teams. And then just a few years ago, I was brought on as the national director for Ride to Defeat ALS and our endurance program nationally. So I oversee all of our strategy and resources and guidance for our rides and endurance nationally.
That's awesome. Well, we know our friends over at Op3 always raise up good members of the peer-to-peer community. So let's talk specifically about kind of Ride to Defeat ALS. And so that y'all have expanded to a lot of new markets during your tenure in that role. When you're thinking about launching something new, where do you decide on where to go next? Like, how do you know if a market is going to be the right fit?
Yeah, it's been, I think, 6 or 7 new rides in the last 9 years that I've been a part of. And it's happened all different ways. I'll say it's come to me from a board member, from a community member, from somebody living with ALS. from me. So there's a variety of ways that it can kind of come about. For the more successful ones, I would say they got to be near a big market. They don't have to be in the city, right? Because riding around a big city is not as fun or as safe. But somewhere near a big market is really crucial to the potential of growth. And if you find that, and from there you have to have maybe some other events with your organization. For us, I feel like that's another key piece is, have we had a walk there? Have we had galas, or do we have a really big presence with major gifts in that area? So there's, a community that we can approach and say, hey, you've supported us before. We have this new event, this new menu for you to support us again. And you have to have volunteer leadership. So people who are already bought in, interested, want to actually help you make it happen. Because we can have staff have a great idea, but then no local leadership and then it just falls flat because the staff only know so many people, but really you need somebody who's connected to the cause, is kind of known in the community, has a network of people that want to get involved. And from there it can grow. They're already going to be the fundraiser. They're already going to be one of your top teams. They're going to help you pitch sponsorships. And we like to say it's, staff led, volunteer led and staff guided. And that's really crucial for the success of rides because there's a lot to do.
This idea of moving to a new market, I think sometimes one of the downfalls that a lot of organizations do is, frankly, they move a little too quickly, right? They get this board member that comes to us and says, we want to start an event in X city, or a volunteer, and this immediate jump to when can we do it without understanding the planning and the buildup that has to come together to put together a really good first year event. I've had some friends that they call it year zero, right? The idea of like starting something new. But so what is that typical timeline to get a new ride off the ground? What does success look like in that planning period?
We've had supporters say, I want to have a ride in 3 weeks or 3 months even.
Of course.
And, many times I'm like, oh, it takes much longer to do that. That happened in Seattle just a couple of years ago. We had somebody who lost their dear friend to ALS, who was a cyclist. She wanted to have that ride in 3 months. We had to push back and say it takes 12 to 18 months for us to really, make that happen, because you have to figure out who the decision makers are in your organization, whether that's your territorial leadership, chapter president, or if has to go to your board or your finance committee or your chief finance officer or chief development officer. You have to figure out who has to say yes in that whole process. And for us, we developed an assessment form for rides, for walks. If you want to start a new event, a distinguished event, or a golf event or a gala, you have to fill this out first. That's the very first step. And for us, that form walks you through all the things you have to consider going into a new ride, for example. And from that, it's, do you have a venue? Do you have routes? Do you have local leadership? What are the numbers add up to be? If you want to raise, $100,000, how many riders do you need? Is that possible? Do you already have events in the market? Are you competing with other charity events in that market? Are there other successful charity events, rides specifically in that market? And all of those pieces have to be filled out and thought through. And that's like an 18-month process. So that's like the very first step. And then it goes through me as the strategic lead, local leadership, staff-wise, your committee. And if everybody's on board there, then it has to kind of go through your approval process. And then if they approve, then it has to go through your digital engagement team. They have to build a site. And that's probably around 12 months out. You have to customize that site. You have to start actually meeting with your committee regularly, working out the kinks, making sure that the jurisdictions are going to be okay with it. Cause that's a big rides, because sometimes you're going through 10 different counties and cities and what have you. And some need those permits a year in advance. Some don't even accept them until 60 days before. So you have to kind of understand all those pieces.
Yeah.
And then if all that kind of lines up and you have a good date, you're not competing, you have a proven market, you have local leadership, you have some good fundraisers on board. We usually try to launch the site around 8 to 10 months before the event. ideally. And then you're working with marketing and communication, getting all that stuff rolling, having sort of a kickoff event around 4 months out, and then just driving recruitment and retention there. And as far as success in a first year event, for us, I think we've set the bar kind of low because we don't have a whole ton of rides right now nationally. It says $50,000. I think we're looking to raise that to 75 or 100 soon, because we've seen that success for us. And that's just getting 150 riders, 200 riders, because even with that low of a turnout, each rider's raising $900 to $1,000 each, and they bring in those dollars, and that's the impact of a first year event. And then from there, you want to see it start jumping pretty quickly.
I want to go back first. I have a lot of things I want to go back to. First, to the assessment, right? And I think that having that documented, I think, is so key, because I do think sometimes, the ride sometimes seems a little sexier than the walk, right? And people don't, or maybe it has the potential to raise more money. Sometimes people see big dollar signs of what they have the opportunity to raise without actually understanding the work that goes into this. And so I know I can think of some events in my history where people would want to launch a new event, and you kind of use that assessment, yes, as a guiding tool. It can also scare people away in a good way, in the sense of when you really break down brass tacks and go, okay, if you want to do this event in your market, this is what it really takes to make it successful. And you kind of help them figure out very quickly if this is something they want to take on or not. Because I imagine there's sometimes people that raise their hand and say, we want to do this. And then once they really start digging into it, they're like, this might be more than we're resourced for, or this, maybe our market isn't the right fit for this. And you kind of catch them before they've gone too far down the road and set themselves up not to be successful.
100% agree. And we've done that. It's people like, that sounds great. After I explain what's possible, with $1,000 average per participant, that sounds really nice. Like, let's do that. But then going through that assessment can be like, oh, actually, I don't know if I have enough time for this, or if we don't have that leadership, or we don't have a proven market, or it's not next to a big market. And for, that Seattle ride's a great example of, it wasn't a no, it was a not in 3 months. It's not possible to do in 3 months, but let's plan through this. Let's go through this assessment. What's possible? Is the venue going to donate their space? Are they going to support and help promote it? And we did it the next year, and it, went 50% over its goal for its first year. And it was because we took the time to plan it and promote it and, do it right and budget it correctly. So when you do it right, it can fall in line.
And then I think the other challenge sometimes with that 12 to 18 month timeline is just building momentum, right? Especially, I've often kind of thought in the peer-to-peer space, until you start to see the numbers hit your reports of the number of walkers, the number of riders, the dollars coming in, it's hard to feel your progress and feel motivated to keep with it. So how do you keep people kind of motivated or celebrating their success through that planning period, so that they don't lose all steam by the time the recruitment part and the fundraising part actually even starts?
Yeah, for a first year event, it's hard to know what's possible, especially if you've never done a ride. Like what and when, how do we do this to get to success? For us, I think having a really strong committee is a big part of that. Having that team of people that you are checking in with every month as you are building progress, as you are securing locations and getting green lights as you go along is really a big part. And we have a development timeline as well throughout the whole year. But without year over year numbers, that's also hard. So what part of my job is to work with them on, what's the goal, like number of participants, number of teams, sponsorship dollars. And then from there, we set out benchmarks. So it's not just, oh, we have this $100,000 goal or $500,000 goal. That's so scary. We're 6 months out. We're not even halfway there. It is, as we know in peer-to-peer, it's this ramp, and it's a slow ramp at the beginning. But as long as you're hitting those benchmarks or you're getting close to them, that means you're doing kind of what the industry benchmark is, or historically for the association, what that benchmark is, and you're on track. And so that's right, eating the elephant one bite at a time. And that's what I try to get folks focused on is, are you meeting what we're expecting right now versus what we're expecting at the end? Because those little progressive steps really start getting you there. And, I've done it a bunch of different times. So I see what's possible and how it all comes together at the end.
Yeah, I agree. Those kind of monthly milestones. And even sometimes they're not quantitative. Sometimes they're qualitative. And that's okay to say, how are you, have you checked off some of these items just to feel that sense of progress towards the end game? I just feel like it's really important. So you mentioned committees, and I agree. I think too often I've seen organizations try to go into a new market and it kind of a belief of if we build it, they will come, for a Field of Dreams reference. And that is not always going to be the case. So when you're going into that new city, maybe you've got a handful of leaders, but how do you really build community, build credibility in a brand new location, especially, maybe you don't have a super strong base of existing cyclists or supporters in the area?
Yeah, I think it's in the details. And that's a lot of times where I come in because I've seen so many Ride to Defeat ALS events. I've also, through Op3, as I mentioned, seen a lot of really fantastic multi-million-dollar events. And so I know it's possible. And so especially in the first year, I try to be as involved as I can in those committee meetings because the staff is usually a little greener. They've never seen a ride, or they might not even be a cyclist where I am. And so I jump into those meetings. People ask questions. Typically, committees for rides are people that are cyclists. And so they are asking those questions. They're a little more demanding, and you have to be prepared for that. And if you are, and you know the details, you know the vision of what it's supposed to look like, your committee believes in it. And then I think from there, it kind of permeates from your committee out to their community. And they're the ones that are going to be bringing those posters to the bike shop. They're going to be the ones going to a bike club. They're going to be the ones emailing and going on Facebook and sharing it out to their friends. So you want to empower your committee and your early registration participants, those early team captains, to be your evangelists for the event, with the information that you have and the vision that you have for the event. So I think that's really, really important. Knowing the details, like the back of your hand, has been helpful for me because it can be challenging. Yeah.
I agree. I can, again, think of another event kind of that I've worked on in the past. When I was at Make-A-Wish, they have a hiking event, a 26-mile hike through the woods, right? And we would require that before somebody even puts that event in their budget from another chapter, they had to go see one, because it was one of those events, again, to know the details and to understand, okay, this is what this event actually looks like before you go and plug and say, I'm going to do a $150,000 hiking event for the first time. You need to understand what you're getting yourself into. So what does that, beyond going to committee meetings or sitting in, what does that support and staffing look like for the staff in a new market in that kind of critical first year?
Well, you have to have a point person, right? I don't think you can have like 3 people working on one event and like just independently doing things. It gets kind of tricky that way, right? And confusing, and who's actually doing what, who do I follow up with for what? So having a really strong staff point is crucial. That's somebody who can build relationships, someone who understands logistics, and someone who's really calm when a lot of riders are asking why their fundraising can't count for their friend or where the best parking is. So that point person, got to have somebody who's the lead, that staff guided, right? That staff part, they're leading the committee. I would say a staff mentor is really important for that, especially for that first year. So somebody who, like me, knows what the vision of the program is and the event. And that doesn't have to be a national director. It can be like your managing director or somebody who has also seen the event. That's really crucial, because if you haven't, we've all come up through the field. You don't know until you experience it. And then you're like, okay, it all starts to click. So first year event's kind of hard for a new person. So having that mentor is really crucial. And then having the volunteer leader, we talked about the committee, but that's a requirement. Like we can't just have this shoehorned event that a staff person is like, this is going to be big, but we have nobody that initially wants to do it right away and it's going to be great. You have to have somebody who is going to sign up early, that's going to help recruit their friends and then build that out from there. So those are the three parts that I would say are really crucial. Having the point person, having a mentor, having your volunteer leader.
Yeah. I think that has always been something in the peer-to-peer world. When you work on one event all year long, you're always going to have one where you haven't actually seen the event yet. And so I think the idea of mentoring, whether it's across markets, whether it's within a team, whether it's with the national office, just having the buddy system to say, if you're having questions as you come along, I think it's a really simple thing, but I don't think happens in a lot of places. So I imagine, you've said you've launched, 7 to 8 new rides in the past, 9 years. I imagine not every launch has gone as planned. So what do you do when that new event doesn't do as well, or it struggles to kind of get off the ground? How do you pivot? How do you kind of learn from that for the next time? What does that look like?
Yeah, last year was a really good example of this for me. And if you're not failing, you're not trying, right? So we tested 2 gravel rides last year. One was in Washington, the one I already spoke about, that did really well. And then we tested one in the Ozarks in Arkansas. But that was one that was brought to us from a staff person who had been in that market for a long time and just had a feeling that it would do well. And there were already some gravel rides in the area. So it's going to be successful no matter what, even though we didn't really have the strong volunteer leadership, or it wasn't really in as big of a market as we thought it would be successful. So we got a schedule, did the assessment, launched it. Oh, lo and behold, there's another event on the same date. We have to move it now. So we moved it again. Or we moved it for the first time. Then it was in June in Arkansas. And if anybody remembers last year, tornadoes ripped through Arkansas.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So we had to transition one walk into a virtual. We moved the ride one more time to the fall. And then that staff person left. So we had no on the ground staff person, no committee. Fundraising kind of stopped, recruitment stopped, and nothing was moving for months. And so in the end, we had to decide, I think this needs to turn into a virtual event. If people want to keep fundraising, that's the way we'll have to do it. And this just didn't work out this time. So that's an example of failing. But I feel like it's not a failure if you're learning something from it. And so we learned a lot from that. And there needs to be more data around the way we decide on how and when and where to launch a ride. And so this year we launched one in Texas. We took a really great idea from Princess Margaret Foundation, from Mercer, where he said, rip and duplicate. Although we did this
R&D.
before R&D. And it was before, I heard him say that at peer-to-peer, but it was exactly what we did in Texas, where we looked at another charity ride that was already successful in the hill country in Texas. And we just did it in a different time of year. Like there's already that culture of charity rides. There's already the beautiful routes. We had some connection. It was between 2 markets. We had clinics there. We had walks there. And we had a really strong staff person there. And so it was just the perfect storm. And we had the volunteer leadership, like I was mentioning. So all of those pieces, I think we learned from the Ozarks event that is missing some of these things. And this market had those things. And it was the best launch to an event that I've been a part of in my 9 years for a first year event. So, you got to look at those and say, okay, we did everything right here. So how do we do that again somewhere new? And, we got to start thinking about that 18 months, 12 months from now.
Right. Well, and I think a market like the Ozarks, it's probably a market that looked great on paper, right? I do think it's a very active gravel cycling
Walmart's
market.
there. Yeah,
exactly. Opportunity for corporate partnerships. That doesn't necessarily mean you can just drop in and plant an event in that market just because, I think sometimes people get, especially in this endurance space, anything outdoor, people think we can just drop it in and people will show up. And I don't think that's, obviously, with what you just described, you got to have a lot of other markers.
Yeah, especially I would say for us, it's a smaller brand of what we do at the association. Our Walk to Defeat ALS is our biggest peer-to-peer platform, right? It's smaller, so less people know about it. There's less marketing dollars behind it. So when you compare it to a massive series like Bike MS or Tour to Cure or Ride to End Alzheimer's, it's much smaller. So you can't just drop it in there and then pump some marketing into it. We don't have that marketing. We don't have that brand loyalty really. So it's harder for us, and you really do need to have those other pieces in play and established.
So if someone is sitting here listening and thinking, I know my platform needs to grow, we need to expand it to some new markets, what advice would you have for them if they're going into that undertaking?
Know who the decision makers are in your organization, who will say yes or who will say no, and kind of gauge their appetite for it. Or you can ask your boss to kind of see what their appetite is, and do some research, do your research, assess the risk. For me, I think the biggest takeaway again is the rip and duplicate. Where are other organizations that are really successful at this doing it? Or where have they done? And can we take that same idea and do it in the same market or somewhere else, but probably in the same market and just a different time of year? That's the biggest and easiest way to think about it. But also realize you got to temper your expectations your first year. It takes time to build that credibility, that reputation, that success. You plant the seeds now, and you might not get that sponsorship for 2 to 3 years, but you ask every year, you build the reputation of your event. And then you start seeing the success. So remember, it takes time. You eat the elephant one bite at a time, rip and duplicate, and use the data. That's a lot of stuff on once, but
it is. But, I often encourage people, though, to just go see other events in your market, too. I mean, again, it's easier to do that with a walk, honestly, than maybe with the cycling event. But I think you go to other events in the community and in some ways, you kind of sets the bar of expectation of like, oh, okay, they're not perfect either, or this is what their presentation looked like. This is what their branding looked like. We could do this, makes you feel both achievable. And you also start to look around the room, or not the park or, wherever the venue is, and realize that maybe there's some companies that you already have connections with that understand an event like that. You might see people, so I used to sign up. I am on so many peer-to-peer mailing lists because I have been to many an event in my time, and I was always the super sleuths. That was my team name. And I would even bring like my marketing person with me. We would go to them together and look when we were first starting to get started with launching the walk at St. Jude. We would just go look and just see kind of what this looks like and what is out there. And we don't calling it rip off and duplicate, but a lot of it is at most of these events. So
yeah, and that's what I did earlier in my career. I have less time to do it now with little kids, but I would just be like, hey, do you need a staff person? Do you need extra on event help? And I would go to all these different events and work on them and see them. And I can recommend that more is just go see these events, especially if you haven't seen a ride, for example. You might see like, oh, this is the vibe. This is what we're missing. We're missing this whole constituency of people who want to do crazy endurance events, come back and be a part of this huge celebration. We're missing that. Or it might be like, this is too much work,
Exactly. And that's okay. Rather figure it out early.
Yeah, you got to figure it out early. I agree.
I think one of the things I love about the peer-to-peer or professional forum community is that willingness and that interest. And so I will make a plug, to everyone at home. If you're sitting there listening thinking, yes, I do want to launch a cycling event and I need to go see some, reach out to me, reach out to someone like Cliff. We could probably connect you with somebody that's either close by or could be a relative, an opportunity for you to go volunteer and invest in the development of your program. We can help make those connections if you don't know where to start.
Agree. Yeah. And I've had other folks from other organizations come and talk with our teams. I'm happy to do that with your teams as well. Yeah.
There's room for everyone. So Cliff, if there are people sitting there wanting to know more about the ALS Association or Ride to Defeat ALS, where can we send them in our show notes?
Yeah, als.org. I mean, that's where you find out more about what we do, the impact we're making, our mission to make ALS a livable disease until we cure it. And especially if you are living with ALS or know someone living with ALS, there are a ton of resources there. To find more about Ride to Defeat ALS, you go to als.org/Ride to Defeat ALS, and that'll show you all the rides we have right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know the idea of launching new markets is always hot on people's mind, and I think you've given some really great framework for people to think through it. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
The P2P Soap Box is produced in partnership with True Story FM, engineering by Pete Wright. Music this week is by Tsubutan. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we hope you'll consider doing just that for our show. But the best thing that you can do to support the P2P Soap Box is simply share the show with a friend or colleague. Thank you for listening.